Obviously, the pharmaceutical industry is going to benefit greatly by the pushing of these drugs, right? The more we expand the market to medicalizing and normalizing the range of human responses, then you can create customers for life. And that's exactly what these drugs do, because they do create a cascade of problems.
These drugs are very dangerous because they do disconnect you from empathy.
Oh, yeah.
But they disconnect you not just from your fellow humans, they disconnect you from the divine.
What they determine to be effective treatment is to feel nothing. They want you to feel dead inside.
Decentralize, don't compromise, be unauthorized. Decentralize, decentralize, got to realize, don't decarbonize. Decentralize, decentralize.
Welcome to today's episode of Decentralized TV here on the free speech video platform, Brighteon.com. I'm Mike Adams, the founder of Brighteon, and of course I'm joined by my co-host, Todd Pittner, today. Welcome, Todd, from the great state of Florida. How you doing?
Cheers. I'm good, Mike. The Mother Nature is coming to kick our butts here again, and I'm afraid my food force probably is going to get just burn out because it's going to touch 28 degrees and
oh, it's a freeze coming.
Yeah. On the heels of 2 weeks ago, which half decimated everything. So I think this one's just who knows, Mike? It'll bounce back.
It'll bounce back. Yeah. Well,
but it's cold out there.
Well, for Florida, it's cold. But
yeah.
we have viewers in Canada. They're laughing at us both right now.
I know. No violins. They aren't taking any violins out for
no.
Todd.
No, they're like on a day that's 15 degrees Fahrenheit. They're like, it's summer,
Right.
Running around shirtless. Anyway, we have a great show today and a very important topic. Let me just sort of set it up. We've got two guests coming in studio who are going to talk about the decentralization philosophy involving psychiatric drugging and the psychiatric drug complex. And we actually have a doctor with a clinic joining us who's got a lot of experience in this area, plus an old friend of the show, Tracy Thurman, joining us. So what do you say? Should we just jump right to it?
Let's do it. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Here we go. Stay tuned. All right, so Todd, here we go. I've got these two incredible guests in studio. It's Dr. Roger McFillan from the Radically Genuine podcast and Tracy Thurman. Thank you both for joining us today in studio. It's a very special day of Decentralized TV. We've got Todd remotely from Florida, you in studio. We're going to have a blast, so welcome.
Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Todd, when are you going to come?
May.
Okay. We'll have you in studio in May. We'll invite our guests back. It would be awesome to have all four of us in the same spot.
It would be.
But this will work too. So this is the first time we've spoken. Dr. Roger McFillan. Can I just call you Roger?
Call me Roger, please.
Okay, I'll do that. Can you give us a little background of your work and your podcast?
Yeah, I'm a clinical psychologist based out of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and I started a podcast back in 2021 called Radically Genuine. And really it was a response to a lot of what we were seeing with tyranny and the COVID pandemic. But I was coming from it from a different angle, which was the mental health epidemic that was occurring within our country. And what I was seeing, and what we currently see, is this mass prescribing of pharmaceutical drugs, SSRIs, amongst others, in response to people having very normal and expected reactions to life events. And I've seen this over the course of my career in the mental health industrial complex, where it's this labeling and drugging model, which in itself has just created mass harm, not only from just the collective consciousness and the way that we describe emotional pain, but the harm of these drugs. I did a deep dive on the background and the research of SSRI drugs to start, and really how they fraudulently were brought to market and how they're pushed on our primary care docs, and the absolute dangers that these have on multiple levels. So I think in my own evolution, I just started with the science, but then I've kind of moved into a direction where I really see this as very dark, a spiritual attack, a weapon of war, really, because the drugs themselves, their prime effect is to really emotionally blunt and sedate the American population of the Western world, and being able to look into what these drugs do as far as just mitochondrial poisons, where now their main effect, I think, is really creating a emotionally numb and sedated group of people, which is going to lead what can be a transformational episodic experience. Like, life is hard, life brings about challenges, and we've manufactured a lot of these psychiatric illnesses.
Oh, yeah.
And the manufacturing of these illnesses has really impacted the way that people view their own internal experience. It's like we've been sold a lie. The American public has been sold a lie that life should be without pain.
You've hit upon like 10 big issues right there. But let me just say, I think Todd and I both agree with you. The over-medicalization of normal human experiences and the range of emotions that used to be considered normal, like if your friend moved away down the street, you would be sad. Today, it's a disease.
Yeah.
You know. But just before we go on, and I'm going to ask Todd to give you the first real question here. Tell our audience how they can follow your work, your podcast, your website.
Sure. You can follow me on X at Dr. McFillan. You can go to drmcfillan.com, just see my website and the Radically Genuine podcast. And my Substack is what's really growing right now. That's Radically Genuine. Again, drmcfillan.substack.com, where I'm writing on these issues. And it's been a leading bestseller on health politics on Substack.
Okay, just to be clear, your Substack prefix, is it Radically Genuine?
It's Radically Genuine with Dr. Roger McFillan, but
with Dr. Roger. That's kind of a lot of words there.
If you just type in Radically Genuine,
okay,
you know, you'll get me. But it's at drmcfillan.substack.com.
Okay, might need drugs to type the whole.
Yeah,
no, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
This is sometimes people don't know, should they spell out doctor or just use DR, this or that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, DR. Yep.
Like you say, okay, if they just type in Radically Genuine.
Yep, and you can get from the Radically Genuine website, you can get to my Substack as well.
Okay, and then Todd, hold on to your question.
All right.
I'm inviting Tracy to introduce yourself. Now, we've spoken before. You've done amazing advocacy work in many areas of liberty and freedom, but I understand there's some additional context you want to share with our audience today. So how would you like to introduce what you're about to cover?
Sure. So yeah, I've been on this show before. Huge fan. And obviously, Mike, before, we've talked about the Roger Ver case, which I worked on. We've talked about the Amos Miller case, which I've worked on. So that's what I'm more known for. But I decided to start becoming public about the impact of SSRI drugs and the impact it had on my own life. And this is something a lot of people wouldn't want to talk about. But I'm watching so many lives get ruined, so many young people destroyed, so many children drugged before they're old enough to think, that I've decided it's time to start being public about what I went through in hopes that others don't have to.
So you're going to share some details with us today about your experience.
I will.
Okay, and that's new information to me. That's not something we've ever talked about.
No.
All right, so Todd.
Yes, sir.
We have a full house here.
We
today.
really do.
So,
we really do. So
where do you want to begin?
Well, you know me, man. I have my new strategy. Roger, doctor, two-part question. How do you define the psychiatric industrial complex and who benefits most from it? And the second question is, how much of what we call mental illness today is actually a rational response to a sick system?
Ooh, good question.
Two great questions. Now, I look at the psychiatric industrial complex from multiple perspectives. There's the therapy industrial complex, and there's psychiatry and corporate medicine. Obviously, the pharmaceutical industry is going to benefit greatly by the pushing of these drugs, right? The more we expand the market to medicalizing and normalizing the range of human responses, then you can create customers for life. And that's exactly what these drugs do, because they do create a cascade of problems, dependency being one of them. So when people try to get off these drugs, they experience this withdrawal effect that gets mislabeled as like a return of your mental illness. So you have just millions of people who can't get off SSRIs or a range of other psychiatric drugs. So this corporate medicine, this medical industrial complex benefits greatly. The insurance companies continue to benefit. I think it's just a large machine and apparatus at this point. And I look at from any standpoint of a government that wants to have greater control over its people, is you have to be able to create dependence on an authority. And that's exactly what you do when you create in consciousness this idea that there's something broken within you when you experience normal human emotions. And I think emotions are energy. I mean, they're what drive justifiable anger and revolution. I think when you're experiencing sadness, we don't even use the word sadness anymore. So the younger generation just labels it as depressed. So you can't even identify with the word being sad. It's not normalized in our culture anymore. And these are signals, like these are primary signals that let us know that there's something in our life that we have to change. And instead, when you begin to internalize that as, oh no, there's something wrong with me, some biological abnormality, well, you just surrender yourself to the medical autonomy or to the medical authority, and you surrender your autonomy, and now you see your life completely different. See, what's held in consciousness really matters to me. So obviously there's a huge industry, the therapy industry in the same respect, is where you take these kind of normal and episodic conditions, people are struggling in their life, and now they just focus on it, and I think
they identify
with these labels. And that's of real concern with me. Abigail Shrier wrote a great book called Bad Therapy. And what it does is it takes advantage of vulnerable people where you don't necessarily see problems in your life as just something to overcome. You actually like deep dive and focus on every era of your life that is like causing some degree of a problem. Like, and so if you know anything about human flourishing, like the worst thing you can do is just focus on yourself all the time.
Yeah.
And the therapy industry has a way of doing it. So, that's the complex in itself. And I'm sorry now that when you have these two-part questions, then the second one I did forget.
No, that's okay. He's using that to stuff extra questions into the timeline. That's a trick he came up with about 2 episodes. Todd, we're on to you.
I know you are. And everybody should know who's seeing this shot right now. I am also known as Big Head Todd and the Monster, and you can buy my album anytime.
Okay, but picking up on what you just said, I've heard many people say something like, quote, I'm bipolar.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, so is the planet. I mean, hey, welcome. That sounds earthy to me. But people identify as their disease.
Right.
I'm ADD or I'm ADHD. I just say, I'm creative. I'm curious. I have a lot of energy to explore the world. You label it however the fuck you want. I'm going to look at the world and have fun with it. I'm sorry about my profanity, but every emotion and every benefit and trait and creativity of a kid is not some disease to be drugged into oblivion.
Yeah, I argue against the idea they're diseases at all. The DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is the psychiatric Bible, has the worst reliability and validity that you can imagine. It doesn't meet even like the minimum kind of standards for scientific efficacy at all. And so we have these descriptive labels, which are just like, which you can just continue to expand when you're talking about mood, for example, or you talk about mania or hypomania. You just continue to expand the definition of what that means to the point where if you live this very restricted life where you hardly feel anything, that apparently is normal for the psychiatric industry. So these aren't diseases at all. There's no medical test. There's no biomedical test at all, although they've argued that there's this chemical imbalance. Obviously, there's no scientific basis for that. There's no testing.
It's just the opinion of the psychiatrist typically.
Which is so dangerous because in my line of work, I've seen people be forced psychiatrically hospitalized. And once you get in there, you're forced drugged. And this can be from conditions of just like somebody was in a abusive relationship and they got out of it.
Yeah.
Or now what we're seeing is this rise in what they call spiritual delusions, because you can't talk about God in the psychiatric industrial complex because it's a pure materialist paradigm. So if you say I found Jesus or I found God or, I feel I'm praying over somebody or feel happy, they start automatically kind of evaluating the presence of a delusion. There's a huge uptick in these cases as well.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, Tracy, you want to jump in on this? Because Roger opened the book right there to a number of topics. And Todd, hold your question.
Sure.
You'll be up next. But Tracy, where do you want to jump in?
This is interesting to me because I'll go into a little more of the story of how I landed up on these drugs in the first place. I'm in a strange situation of having not landed up on them due to actual symptoms of sadness or worry. But the one thing I will say, on what Roger just mentioned in terms of the spiritual aspect. My experience is that SSRIs do the opposite of what psychedelics do. Psychedelics thin the veil. For good or bad, they thin the veil to the experience of the other world. Psychiatric drugs thicken the veil or disconnect you entirely. And the difference could not be stronger. I was a person of faith at the time that I was put on these drugs. Very shortly thereafter, I became a full-blown materialist atheist. My connection to the divine was severed.
Really?
Yes. And I continued in that for years, about 7 years, as a materialist atheist, interacting with, the American Atheist Organization, Richard Dawkins, that whole crowd, until I used psychedelics. And I did it to treat PTSD, like self-treatment, and ended up accidentally curing my atheism instead.
But and then that thinned the veil and allowed you to connect with the divine.
Yes, it did. And I learned from personal experience what many other people have come to see as well, which is that these drugs are very dangerous because they do disconnect you from empathy.
Oh, yeah.
But they disconnect you not just from your fellow humans, they disconnect you from the divine.
Well, that's why they're also associated with, demonic mass shootings and school shootings.
Exactly.
Because the person, as I understand it, maybe Roger, you could explain more, but usually the young male kid who's been bullied in school, he gets put on SSRIs, and then he feels like he's no longer connected at all, and he's not even a real person in a real world. It's a simulation. Yeah. And then the shooting has no, moral or spiritual consequences. Is that a fair, or how would you describe it?
I just published an article on this titled, "They Want You to Feel Dead Inside." And I think that's the best description of a victim of the psychiatric industry, is what they determine to be effective treatment is to feel nothing. And, one of the things that's so important for a culture is this interconnectedness between us and all of nature. And when you are disconnected, and Tracy mentioned there's good scientific data regarding decreasing empathy. We see this in changing marriages where a spouse has started on an antidepressant and then kind of rewrote their own history with their spouse and has left that marriage. It's broken up families. There's a large Facebook group around this. So I think I see this as an attack on life. I see it as a spiritual weapon of war just because of the consequences of taking these drugs. Once you get in the way of somebody kind of facing their darkness and understanding their life as a soul's journey, and you talk about yourself as kind of like a machine-like, as if we're just a kind of like in a meat suit here where you can intervene on a certain neurochemical in the brain and then improve the human experience. It's a very dangerous road because those consequences have been significant in our culture. And there's without a doubt an increase in violence against self and others for people who take just one SSRI. That's scientifically validated. Yeah. Now, what happens then when you combine those with other mind and mood altering drugs? Well, they've never been evaluated, but you can only imagine when you begin to interfere with nature in that way, is that people feel like they are completely detached and disconnected. And I believe vulnerable to messages, whether those are dark demonic messages, or if there's an intelligence agency or someone else who wants to institute a degree of control over the person, it's easy to plant things into a person's subconscious, which I think is part of it.
The MK Ultra healthcare system. Hey, Todd, Trump says he's going to revolutionize healthcare and make all these drugs less costly.
Yeah, so
what do you think about that?
Oh, yeah, he's on it, man. I mean, why I voted for him, not.
Discount SSRIs.
You're right.
Yeah, buy them by the dozen,
Make SSRIs great again, Mike.
That's too many letters for the hat.
Yeah, it's way too many letters.
Yeah.
Tracy, first of all, thank you for sharing and lifting the veil to your medical history, and it tees up a question that I wrote that I'd like to ask you, Roger. How often is mental illness actually a crisis of meaning or spiritual disconnection? And if it is, and suffering is rooted in lost meaning, can medication ever be the answer?
No, never. It's actually an impediment. And so what's interesting is we have this umbrella term called mental illness. And so then people think about that, they associate it with maybe someone who's homeless on the street and has schizophrenia. And that's actually a quite rare condition, which we treat very poorly here in the United States with antipsychotic drugs, which just create metabolic illness and a cascade of other problems, where other countries who approach the condition differently have much better response rates. But what is under the umbrella now of mental illness? I guess mental illness is anything that causes some emotional distress at all, any suffering. And what I see in my practice 15 years ago, you'd have a percentage of people that came in on like one psychiatric drug. Now it's rare for us to see anybody come into our center without it being on at least one psychiatric drug. On all of these conditions, nearly 100% of these conditions started with a very understandable life circumstances. And their response to the life circumstances can be problematic. It can either lead you to overcome it, or you can then go down a road in which you self-identify as being ill or broken, and it alters your own perception of who you are. But when we talk about these conditions that are on the rise, depression and anxiety, for example, those labels, I really do believe that's a crisis of meaning. We're more excluded from each other. We're separated. We're in this illusion of separation. And the more you get disconnected and then you throw yourself into technology and you're living this virtual world under artificial lighting.
I can't wait to ask you more about this.
Yeah,
We'll save that for later.
I mean, you're basically eating poisons, right? You have this, you're detached from natural light. You're not connected to nature in the way that we used to be. You're not interacting together. You're creating this virtual world. And one of the things that I've done in every single evaluation is ask somebody, because they're often looking for some type of label or diagnosis for what they're feeling. I'll say, pull out your phone. Let's look at your screen time. And I've seen this over the past 15 years. It would start off with someone's like on their phone for like 2 hours a day. And I used to think that was, way too much. And now I'm seeing 8 to 10 hours on that phone is typical for a younger generation. So younger generation, I'll say somewhere between 16 and 25, that core group that's turning to these drugs. They're self-labeling with these conditions. I have depression. I have ADHD. And they're looking for the chemical solution.
And they're on their phones 8 hours a day in many cases?
They are. If you've ever witnessed...
that's just...
If you ever witnessed the younger generation...
Free time.
Well, they interact with each other on the phones. Like if they're in a group situation, they're on their phones interacting through social media.
Whoa. Okay. So, Todd, were you going to jump in with something else there?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, can you educate us to what psychosomatic means? So when somebody does start to self-label, how that can manifest?
Yeah, psychosomatic is just those unidentified conditions that we believe are created by the mind, which I would argue there's probably a lot more than what we recognize, that consciousness influences the physical body, influences matter, right? So we see this with the placebo effect and how powerful that is. It's not just a nuisance for the drug companies to compare their product to. Like, it is really that the mind has this powerful ability to self-heal, to relieve pain, especially in mental health. This is the challenges the pharmaceutical companies had with trying to get SSRIs to market, is because the placebo had such a strong response. And so we don't create the conditions where people can self-heal, again, under the illusion of separation, believing that what they experience physically is some outside source. They don't even, most people, I believe, I was listening to one of your shows recently talking about the myth of like being able to catch a cold or viruses, right? Yep. So people have this fear-based consciousness, which they enter into all relationships. What's the consequence then of being in fear? I think that it puts it as a diseased state, right? So the body's not aligned and the nervous system isn't aligned. And what does that do to the immune system? So I think we see this range of effects that people have that are termed psychosomatic, but they certainly are a representation of what the media provokes or what one is exposed to in our culture that leads them to adapt that.
That's a critical point. I'm glad you brought that up, because We are trained by the media to believe certain narratives, like if you're sad, it's because of a brain chemistry imbalance that can be corrected with a pill. Now, for me personally, I've never taken any psychiatric drugs ever, not once. I'm not saying that makes me a better person or whatever. I'm just saying I never thought that whatever I was feeling, because I've felt the whole range of emotions, sadness, frustration, anger, joy, happiness, whatever. But I never thought that the answer to regulating that was going to be found in a pill. Now, then again, I'm pretty much at the very edge of the bell curve of like resisting bullshit. And not everybody is there. But I have always known that these drugs are not going to help me be a better person. I've known that things that make me feel good are exercise. Or today, I actually exercise in a forest with sunshine and kettlebells on the forest floor. I refuse to exercise indoors, regardless of the weather. I've been cold and wet out there and happy and joyful, okay, with kettlebells. But Tracy, the question to you, what was the gateway that got you onto the psychiatric drugs? Were you working with a psychiatrist? Was it a self-decision? How did you come to believe at that time that those would help you?
So I suffered a vaccine injury when I was 20 years old. And it was the Gardasil vaccine. I was one of the first girls, the first wave of girls given this vaccine. No informed consent. Didn't know really what it did. I just know doctors always know what they're doing. And if they tell you to take something, you definitely should. I was told it would, keep me from getting cancer, not what type of cancer, not, none of the real details. But so I took the vaccine and suffered a severe vaccine injury where by the 2 weeks after the third of the 3 shots, I was in the hospital. They were trying to put in a pacemaker to keep my heart going.
What?
Jeez.
I was, when I would stand up, my heart would stop after a few minutes. I was in bad shape. And then I was put out on disability. My student loans were written off. That doesn't even happen in bankruptcy. They monitored you for years, and if they decide you are a permanent lost cause, they'll write off your student loans. So I was not in good shape. And about 2 years after that, I saw a doctor that wanted to put me on Provigil Provigil is a drug that it's an amphetamine to keep you awake. Oh. Because I was suffering such severe brain fog and hypersomnolence, sleepiness, where I was sleeping, up to 16 hours a day. And so they wanted to put me on this, and I knew that was an amphetamine, and so I said, no, I know that's habit forming, it's addictive. And they said, tell you what, there's this other drug we can put you on instead that will just give you energy, but it's been out for 30 some years. It's not habit forming at all. It's very safe. It'll just raise your energy a little. It's called Prozac.
Okay.
Wow.
So did they think I was anxious or depressed because I was sick? Who knows? But it was given to me by a cardiologist. So it didn't even occur to me to look up.
It's bizarre.
It never occurred to me this was a psychiatric drug that I was being put on.
And they throw these pills at patients for everything.
Yep.
You need to control your mood, control your energy, control your sleep, control blood pressure. I mean, it's just pill after pill after pill.
Yeah, so I'm put on this drug. Interestingly, the same day a friend is put on it by the same cardiologist. I have questions that will probably never be answered there. But then in tandem, we both witnessed our faith disappear, our connection to our partners disappear, our connection to other people disappear, our empathy tank. Both of us, were very young, married young, not to the right person, but still. And both of us left our marriages almost immediately. I was 22 years old, I guess, at this point.
Wow.
And my life was blown up. But I didn't realize it was blown up. And I think that is true of so many of the people put in these drugs. Because you are disconnected, you don't know how disconnected you are. Uh-huh. And so it was years until I found psychedelics before I realized how disconnected I had become. When the connection returned, that was when I knew. And so to me, that is one of the greatest dangers here, is that there are so many people, and my heart hurts for the young women, especially going through this, because you don't know what you're going through when you're going through it.
And what psychedelics did you explore? Were you doing microdosing? Were you doing psilocybin, or what kinds of things?
I had read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. And I was dealing with some PTSD issues related to childhood. And I couldn't find anyone to do it for me or, with me as a guide. So I did what full disclosure, I would not recommend this to anyone else, but decided to do it for myself. And so I began meditating in a sensory deprivation tank 3 days a week for 90 minutes. And then eventually did a hero's journey dose of psilocybin in a sensory deprivation tank.
Whoa. Wow.
And I went into that tank one person and came out a very different person, as anyone in my life will tell you. Like Tracy before that, Tracy after that, not the same person. I had been disconnected from my family completely. I had been estranged from my family. I came out of that tank having had a equivalent to a near-death experience and having it connected to source consciousness, the experience of being the drop in the ocean, but indistinguishable from the ocean. And then I wrote a letter to my parents and asked to reconnect with them.
So your reality must have come flooding back into your consciousness.
It did.
In a way.
It did. I mean, I went through what was equivalent to a life review, like people in near-death experiences go through.
Wow. And plus the sensory deprivation must have made it really intense.
Very intense. Yes.
Have either of you heard of ibogaine or iboga? Because I interviewed a woman who does, I guess, iboga type of experience, leading people through those experiences, which are apparently quite profound. Is that, either one of you, is that of some therapeutic exploration for people? Does that have a role in healing?
Now, a lot of that's anecdotal evidence. I think we need more scientific evaluation with all these drugs, including, psychedelics, for example. The question is always for whom, under what conditions, for what.
Yeah.
And those things are really important to study. As a social scientist myself, I'm very interested because I've come across veterans and survivors of various trauma who their healing came through that experience. And it's really important because what they begin to realize is that there was some purpose for the challenge that they went through, right? And so when we talk about the interconnectedness of all things, as you walk out of an experience like that and your perception of what happened to you shifts dramatically, that comes from that experience. And if we can find a way to recreate that in a therapeutic sense, I think that really changes our outcomes, because the typical psychotherapy approach to treating PTSD is slow. The outcomes are moderately strong, depending on the type of therapy that's provided. But a one-session psilocybin treatment and it changes the life of a veteran, those are things we have to pay attention to.
Yeah, well, exactly. Let me, Todd. Let me ask the next question. Then it'll be back to you. But there's someone in my family who is a counselor, mental health counselor, and they tell me that in their whole experience of many decades of doing this, they've never seen people more stressed, more emotionally distraught, and frustrated, and so on. Is there an external factor of just life being harder today for economic reasons, for political strife reasons, for social media, AI job replacement, all these factors that come in? It's hard to afford a house, especially for younger generations. How much do these impact what you are seeing in your practice?
Those are major factors as well. But I look back at human history and just our ancestors and what they've had to go through just to immigrate here, or the challenges with famine and war and disease.
True.
We are resilient people. But what happens when we separate and isolate ourselves from each other? We're no longer really tribal. And so I think it's a different type of condition that people are experiencing, where there's a lot more attachment to technology. There's not as many conscious beings. And what I mean by that is people come into my office and there's not a high level degree of self-awareness of their own internal world, because they're in what I call drift. A great book, Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill, introduced this concept called drift. Fascinating book, because the devil's discussing how he influences souls on this earth. And drift is any time we're just not conscious. So at that point, radio, but then television, and now the use of smartphones and technologies, we're not really mindful and present to the same extent. And so what we're doing is we're being heavily influenced then by propaganda. And that propaganda is defining the human experience. That's why it's so important for us to disconnect fully from technology, be able to be in stillness more often, be able to be in nature more often, and most importantly, have in-person contact and connect with each other. So the more we become isolated and we're not in these real relationships anymore, we're in this virtual world, and you're numbing yourself out with alcohol and Netflix and SSRIs, to me, it's very clear that the natural consequence to that is to be miserable and to be sick.
Right.
And that's what we see. Now, there are other factors economically, of course.
Yeah.
Two parents having to work and then the challenges with their own kids is a whole nother issue.
Well, let me ask Todd's AI avatar. Todd, what a great guest, huh? I mean, both of them
it's
today.
amazing.
We haven't covered this topic on this show. This is
No,
really
we haven't.
critical.
We haven't. And Tracy, it's like, wow, from what I know about a hero's dose of shrooms, what are you, 120 pounds? Wow, that's crazy. And your story connected with me. I have somebody very special in my life who's just had a traumatic upbringing and really tried to get themselves off the same drug that you did. And ultimately, they went through a similar journey, whether it be through, shrooms, or they did do iboga and ayahuasca. And it wasn't until they tried, and I'm not endorsing this, I'm just sharing the story, ketamine, the ketamine lozenges or whatever, to where she had an amazing breakthrough. So really opens my mind up to these I don't know, natural treatments, I guess. But my question is this, towards you, Tracy, is what happens, because you referred to your atheism and then having an experience that modified everything to you, that lifted the veil. What happens when therapy removes God, purpose, and moral framework from healing, Tracy?
I'm now unapologetically not an atheist.
Nice.
And I would say, I don't know how one can truly heal without knowing who you truly are.
Very good.
We're souls that come here to have a human experience. I am not Tracy, right? I am a soul who came here to have a human experience. Tracy is the costume. Like Mike is the costume. Roger is the costume. But who we are souls who came here to have an experience. We didn't come here to be numbed out. We didn't come here to be drugged. We came here to have the polarities, the highs, the lows, the joys, the sorrows of a human experience. And when I finally realized what the SSRIs were and decided to take myself off them, I would not recommend people do this, by themselves. There's a great gentleman called Anders Sorensen who has a Substack. People can go look up, called Crossing Zero, who has a fantastic book, again, called Crossing Zero, which walks through safe tapering. And I recommend anyone who wants to get off these drugs, go read that. Go read his writings before you go to a doctor and trust their advice on how to taper, because most doctors don't know how to do it correctly. But I did it myself because I didn't trust medical authorities at this point, and I didn't do it right. I did it in a linear taper rather than a taper that gets very slow at the end. And so it was a difficult experience for me. But I started it 2 weeks before my mother was diagnosed with an aggressive stage 4 cancer that was going to be terminal. So I'm experiencing coming back online emotionally at the time that I am losing the person I love most in the world.
Wow.
And it was a crucible. If you asked your average psychiatrist, they would have absolutely told me, get back on that drug. You're feeling too much. This pain is going to be too deep. And it was deeply painful. It was searing. But how much worse would it have been for me to not feel that pain? For me to not experience it? It should hurt. I loved my mother Pain is the price we pay for love. Grief is that price. And so for me, there was healing in the pain. There's healing in the grief. And to me, what is so broken about this idea of pain being bad, psychological, emotional, spiritual pain automatically being bad, is it is often where we grow the most. When my mother died 2 years later, I spent much of the last week just sitting with her, holding her hand, singing to her. I was able to be present spiritually in a way I never could have been on the drugs. Did it hurt more? Of course it did. But it should have. And so to me, that's the biggest deal is the lie is don't feel. The reality is realize who you are, what you came here for, and pain is part of that experience.
Right, and thank you for sharing that very intimate experience, by the way. And you've hit upon so many critical points. You know, the modern day soma of our society are these numbing drugs. But speaking about religion and spirituality, the Christian community in America is on all kinds of SSRIs. And they are so numb, and this is my opinion statement, but the vast majority of conservative Christians in America now endorse genocide. They feel nothing for fellow human beings. They think they are ambassadors of Jesus Christ, who never would have committed genocide, while they are endorsing wars, attacks, bombing children, shooting doctors in hospitals in Gaza, etc. And I have to think, but the question to you, Roger, I have to think that that's more than just kind of like a religious thematic indoctrination. There's something really disconnected, especially in people who claim to know Christ and yet endorse violence against innocent children. That never made sense to me. And I didn't mean to make this, political about the Middle East, but it is happening. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It is something that's going on in our world with the Christian community right now.
We're clearly in a spiritual battle. There's no doubt about that. And one way the dark and the enemy can win this war is by shifting or altering the human experience. What makes us human is our shared empathy and our connection for others. The fact that we can become desensitized to images of homicide, genocide, and then try to rationalize it in some way as if it's of God is one of the more confusing aspects of our modern time for me personally. And that's where I'm really concerned about the psychiatric drugging of our population and the amount of Christians that are willing to take SSRIs. Because as I mentioned earlier, and Tracy did such a great job of explaining this, is it does sever us from that deep in depths of the emotional experience, the empathy that is necessary to protect one another, to really feel hurt for a fellow human being. We have these mirror neurons. It's part of the human experience to love one another. And that's a strong message throughout scriptures. And the more that the enemy attempts to sever that connection amongst each other, then that spiritual darkness is what wins in a time like this. And we have to wake up our fellow Christians to the love and connection and empathy to one another. There's no justification for murder, in my opinion, at all. And it's been a sad state of affairs.
Todd, your comments?
Well, yeah, I think I kind of want to talk about technology, AI, and
we do want to get to that. Yeah, let's go ahead and pivot. Go ahead.
Yeah, I believe we're witnessing mass psychological conditioning through digital platforms. And I concur with you. I believe there is spiritual warfare going on right now. I happen to believe it rewinds back to Genesis 6. And the people behind all of it, they've been at it for a long time, eons. And I believe these disembodied spirits, that their food is fear. Is outrage. And so my question to you, Doctor, is how damaging are algorithms built on fear and outrage in our digital platforms?
You mean like social media algorithms that amplify the craziest clickbait?
Yeah, very damaging. I've been publishing a series on brainwashing for my Substack, going into these psychological techniques, these psyops, and the way that they influence us. And so, obviously, because we have these ancestral scripts where we are built to survive, number one. So what's going to garner our attention is anything that can provoke that fear. And it's script breaking, right? Uh-oh, that's dangerous. I have to pay attention to it. And then the second thing is, if from an ancestral perspective, if we did not pay attention to the authority within our tribe, then we would be outside the tribe and we'd be vulnerable to death. So that's like in our brainstem, right? That's so biological.
Obedience is hardwired.
Yep, hardwired in there. And so these algorithms, of course, they're going to be able to measure everything about your attention because your attention is the commodity. And so if you just pause on a certain reel or something on your feed, right, they're measuring that. And that's why you're pushed, especially young men are pushed these bodies of girls. So you pause and you get more and more porn. Or violence at the same time, you get more and more of these images. There's a reason Charlie Kirk's assassination was pushed out into the field in that way. And it's what happens, we're in that drift again. So we're in this like alpha state and we're ingesting this into our subconscious. Right. And then our automatic reactions to a lot of life events are then that same fear provocation where we're more likely just to fall in line to whatever the authority tells us to do. We're mass conditioned in that way. And that's why you isolate people too. Because what's interesting in the Milgram experiments, the obedience experiments, what they don't publish, what they haven't posted was that there were further research evaluations into what happens under various conditions. And if the person observes someone resisting, so the Milgram experiments was the electric shock experiments where we saw that 67% of human beings would continue to follow the authority to provide an innocent person an electric shock that would kill them. So that means 67% of people can be pushed to murder a fellow human being if the authority tells them to continue to do it.
Yes.
However, if somebody resisted ahead, that went down to 10%. So it's so important.
That's us. We are the resistors who show others.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's why it is so important to understand who your authority is. You have one authority, and that is God, and that's the moral authority. And that is how we should be making decisions, and we should be connecting with each other to understand that we have a God-given right to resist authority that oppresses and harms other people.
And what's really, I'm glad you brought up the Milgram experiments because one of the critical aspects of that was, as I recall from reading some of because it was reproduced so many times in so many labs all over the world, but when the study subject would verbally offer resistance, I don't want to shock the person, the authority figure would say, but the protocol requires you to continue.
Yeah.
See, here it is on the clipboard. And the person, okay, then it's required. That's the way people comply with the IRS, with any kind of government survey forms, which I just throw in the trash. Everything the government's telling you, oh, you have to register this, you have to do that. ATF, register your arm brace AR-15. I'm like, I don't think so. No, I'm not going to do that. And then that got overturned anyway, so no longer a felon. But it's all the same authority bullshit, isn't it? And it's all fiction. It's a fiction that people make real in their mind, isn't it?
It's also rooted in our educational system. So you look at the public school system is what are you conditioned to do from such a young age is that you are to follow the authority, which is that teacher, right? Sit in your rows. The bells are the factory bells. Raise your hand. Do not speak unless your hand is raised. And God forbid you act like a child. You want to actually move, drugged. Right? You're going to now, they're going to get that referral for these made up conditions like ADHD. So you're conditioned at a very young age to have to follow the rules. And so people are so scared, again, back to those ancestral scripts, to step outside of, what they view to be as the tribe. And there's usually only a small group of people, percentage-wise, who are willing to fully resist and they get labeled, in this troublemakers. And of course, this is where the psychiatric industrial complex comes into play. How easy now it is to view that there's something wrong with you when really there's everything right with you.
Right.
And Mike, I think it's appropriate for you to share with Dr. McFillan the very first book that you ever wrote with your AI.
That's true. Yeah. So I built the book engine at brightlearn.ai, and actually I announced on this show with Todd, I said the very first book that I want to produce with this is called Awaken Your Inner Middle Finger.
I love it.
And the author is Fu Koff. And that was actually the first book that was published with the new engine. Now it's 20,000 books. But number one starts with, the symbol is a middle finger with a happy face.
Yep. Awesome.
And it was like the perfect symbolism for the message here. Awaken your inner middle finger.
Yes.
So, Tracy, talk to us. You said no to the psychiatric industrial complex at some point.
I did.
And you've been saying no to these false authorities the entire time. How empowering has that been for you to just say no where it's appropriate? Not that you're not a difficult person. You're a very pleasant person to be around. You offer great gifts to humanity, but you also hold your boundaries and say F off where appropriate. Talk about that.
I do. And, I wouldn't have had the ability, the health to take on the fights that I've been here on the show before to talk about if I hadn't stopped listening to the medical complex and decided to heal myself. So that wasn't just from the psychiatric drugs, it was from the vaccine injury. So for me, that was the first step in that was raw milk.
Yeah.
Which at the time someone told me to try it, I was skeptical. I knew nothing about it other than it was very dangerous. And but if you'd told me, cut off a limb and you might heal, I would have considered that as well. So I decided to try it. Wouldn't have been at all surprised to catch some terrible listeria or something. But instead, within weeks, I started to improve and feel better. And it was one of those moments of, oh, I see. Okay, so the thing that I'm told could kill me is the thing that's healing me.
Mm-hmm. And
so
it's deliberate. It's an engineered paradigm.
Exactly. And so from there, one of my first activities, one of my first acts of resistance was to begin helping with the Amos Miller case. And at the time I got involved there, he was facing arrest, his farm being seized, his wife potentially being arrested as well. And while the case isn't over, before I moved on to working on other projects, we'd gotten him to the point where he was open, he was working, and the government had more or less backed off in a standoff position. And from there I moved on to helping the Roger Ver case. So I would say that in general, listening to my own inner compass, listening to my own intuition has served me far better to listening to any authority figure. Because, God reaches us through our intuition. That is the still small voice. And so it has been the greatest joy of my life to have my health back so that I can use it to devote to human freedom.
Wow, well said. And we're all blessed to have you focus on human freedom. And you've been very, very effective. Todd, I know you've got more questions, so go for it.
Yeah, well, I think just kind of on the heels of Awaken Your Internal Middle Finger, Roger, question for you. If healing requires sovereignty, what's the first act of rebellion that people should take?
Everything is happening for you, not to you. So the moment that you begin to approach your life, knowing that even the challenges, even the struggles are there for your own benefit, for your soul's growth, you start pulling yourself outside of this psychiatric drug model, this mental illness model, and you see the human experience for what it is. We speak about the hero journey is more than just taking a large dose of psilocybin. It's also that process that you're on in your life to struggle and then find your purpose. And I see that as also like the resurrection. There's parts of us that are supposed to die and then be reborn. And those parts of us that are supposed to die are the ones where we've made mistakes, where we've hurt ourselves, where we've hurt others. And I think we get closer to God in that process. So I think you say, fuck off to this label that's going to limit and restrict our human potential, and at worst is going to put you in a vulnerable position to be drugged and numbed. And you start seeing your life for what it is. that it is purposeful and it is meaningful, and it's meaningful beyond just your day-to-day trials and tribulations. There's greater lessons here, and I think that's the first part.
So let me jump in on this, Todd.
Okay, sure.
There's the pattern of what you're describing, Tracy and Roger, is this is way beyond a conspiracy. This is an engineered pattern where the authorities ban access to anything that helps people heal. Raw milk, psilocybin, many different herbs have been banned, such as ma huang in Chinese medicine, or ephedra as it's known in Western. And then it's banned for anyone to tell the truth about simple things like vitamin C cures scurvy, or tart cherry extract cures gout, or vitamin D cures rickets. Even though these are well-established known facts, you're not allowed to say any of these things at all if you sell those products. You can't put it on the label. So and I guess is my question, I mean, clearly there's a deliberate effort to dehumanize people, because what's pushed are the things that cloud your mind, that confuse you, or that thicken that barrier that you were talking about, that isolate you from reality and from your connection to society and the cosmos. So how do we not conclude that this is a deliberate effort? It's so obvious at this point.
Well, it's an anti-human transhumanist agenda. The roots are in eugenics. Like, I mean, you can look back, pre-World War II. I mean, it's the same idea. It's just evolved. And so when you push birth control on populations, where you want to limit reproduction, there's a certain attack on life when you poison the food source, when you ban medicines that are designed to heal and work with the body. So there's no doubt that it's deliberate. You're creating sickness and you're creating dependence. And when they are pretty open about their contempt for human beings,
True.
The transhumanists are very open. They believe the population of the world needs to be decreased. We're certain, like, there's a large percent of the populations are nothing but parasites, and that's how they view you. And that the human beings need to be upgraded with technology and AI, and that human consciousness can live forever. It really is a agenda that is anti-God or anti-Christ. And we have to see it for what it is, and human potential and being in alignment with that greater source is much more powerful than any technology that can ever be created.
Yeah, I did want to ask you about AI, but Todd, you have a question or comment.
Yeah, Roger. So where should someone begin if they want to detox from the mental health system?
That's a big question.
Well, you have to start with Radically Genuine Substack and podcast, of course.
Yes. No, that makes sense.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are just kind of red-pilled right now because they've been harmed by the allopathic medical model. And so what you're starting to see is this becoming a little bit more mainstream. To what extent, I don't know, because of that algorithm that we've discussed previously, is we end up getting stuck in an algorithm. When I first started talking out against the psychiatric industrial complex and the harms of SSRIs, I was vilified, absolutely vilified. Yeah. And what's kind of scary for me right now is that's not happening, because now I only get the crowd that approves of my message. But when I go out into the real world and I have these conversations, I'm branded a conspiracy theorist still, despite all the range of evidence that we have. It's still a relatively new topic. Thank God for podcasts like you. When you go out into what people are exposed to in the public school system and academia, they still talk about these drugs as if they're life-saving.
I did a rap song in 2007 called SSR Lies.
You're ahead of the game.
That was considered pretty radical. Or maybe it was 2008, but anyway, it was a long time ago. But the thing that I found over the years is that almost everything that I used to talk about that was considered fringe or radical, like even about the Federal Reserve, or how gold and silver are real money, but fiat currencies are not, or dangers of vaccines, etc. Almost all these things are now accepted by a very large portion of society. And I think the COVID years really taught a lot of people some lessons. I think the outcomes of recent elections, the last 3 or 4 elections, have taught people a lot about the lies of politics and promises and so on. But it's hard to not call this some kind of mass awakening. And Tracy, speak to this. Do you think there's a mass awakening? Is this real? Is this going to continue to accelerate?
I do. I do believe it's going to accelerate. And I see so many people in my own circles who previously were perhaps materialist atheists, perhaps just agnostic, perhaps just hadn't engaged at all, coming to a realization that there is something more. It's as if some piece of them is beginning to remember who they are. And what I think we need to be aware of and be vigilant of is that, as Roger referred to earlier in this conversation, some of these people are being drugged as they awaken.
Right.
A young woman who has a religious awakening, goes out into the street and like asks people like, "How can I pray for you?" Which any of us who have experienced that divine love flowing through us understand that feeling. And a woman like this who then ends up being reported for a wellness check by a family member who's a materialist, who's concerned for her well-being, and ends up being forcibly drugged and held against her will in a psychiatric hospital.
Jeez.
These things are happening. And so I believe an awakening is happening, but I believe that we need to be here to support the people who do awaken.
Yeah.
And that they need to have a framework to understand it when it happens, so that when it happens, they are protected from these type of outcomes.
Well, that's what this show teaches, that very principle, is helping people on their journey to awakening. And decentralization is the term that Todd and I came up with. It's coming up 3 years. This show is almost 3 years old. But it applies to everything. It's about decentralizing your reliance on false authority, decentralizing from your reliance on fake currency or fake messaging, fake news or fake science or whatever the case may be, fake medicine, like
Exactly.
that hurt you. A lot of fake medicine out there.
Fake
Todd?
taxation. Fake taxation.
Yeah, right. Right. But what's amazing to me is how much of all of this is self-inflicted with consent because people go along with it.
Right.
And it's as if I could reach everybody in the world with one message, it would be to trust in yourself and your creator rather than your government and your authorities.
Very good.
That would change the world. Just that one switch right there. Roger, you want to, or go ahead.
I mean, and one thing that I think about often is that when people are in drift, when people are scrolling, when people are watching TV, when they're stuck on social media, you can't hear the still small voice. That still small voice that is God, that is your intuition.
True.
To hear that, you need to be alone with your thoughts. You need to be quiet. And so much is teaching us, don't be alone with your thoughts. Whatever you do, God forbid, you would just be for a few minutes.
Yeah.
We have, if we're not scrolling,
still,
we have music, we have a podcast, we have something. We're so rarely quiet. And when we're also in the grind culture here in America. I just spent a year in Europe where people have a much more balanced life. But here where we're somehow morally failing if we ever stop striving
True.
for 2 minutes. But that's where we connect. And if we connect and listen, start with just 5 minutes a day of just silence, observing your thoughts, not trying to force them, just observing them. And if you do that, you will find eventually you start to hear your intuition again. That thing you may have even forgotten exists. And that to me is where healing begins. It's where sovereignty begins. It's where remembering who we really are begins.
How many inner voices is okay? No, I'm kidding. What if they argue with each other? No, I'm kidding. Roger, we're coming up on the hour here. I would like to invite each of you to put an end cap on this, sort of what's the takeaway for our audience? Because we always want to make this practical, right, Todd? We want to make it practical. This isn't about theory or philosophy as much as we want to help people literally navigate this very challenging reality so that they can survive with their freedom intact, with their souls intact, and also with joyfulness and abundance. That's critical. And we've helped so many of our listeners in so many ways. That's why they love this show. Their lives are improved because of what they've learned here. So with that as the context, what would you like to add, Roger?
Well, if you wanted to manufacture mental illness, if you wanted to create a portion of the population to feel completely disconnected from purpose and meaning, what you would do is you would create through propaganda, through the use of commercials, direct-to-consumer advertising, mass messaging around this idea of mental illness, and you would lead people to have an internal judgment and struggle with their own experience that would lead them to go talk to a doctor about it. And then to be placed on harmful pharmaceuticals that are going to damage your mind, going to disconnect you from your soul and create metabolic dysfunction where you can't get off the drugs. And when you try to, then they'll talk about those symptoms of being relapse of a mental illness that they never medically or biologically can observe anyway. So that's exactly what's happened. We've moved further away from this idea of normalizing the pain and struggle of the human experience. We've tried to disconnect our culture from God. God is a bad word for therapists in the way that they're trained. It's mass indoctrination. So the waking up that we spoke about today is pulling ourselves out of a system that's designed to harm us. And there needs to be parallel systems. Like we have to recreate systems and communities where we can bring these messages back, where there's mentors and elders and stories, things that have been passed down for generations from thriving cultures that has been purposely, we've been disconnected from them. And what has been replaced by that is the expert authority that's been pushed on us or the state. And so I think it's a return to some ancestral roots and understanding how human beings flourish and thrive. To me, it's absurd, the way that we're living. Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of people it is, especially if you're older, if you've been in this transition state, that you've gone from the 70s or 80s, and then you started to see how these psychiatric drugs, illnesses, and then the technology boom has shifted our culture. And so I think it's back to some common sense approaches. And if I can plug one thing, is I recently started a nonprofit called the Conscious Clinician Collective. And that's where we try to unite mental health professionals as well as physicians who are going to oppose the label and drug model that's being pushed on our population. And people have to have somebody to turn to. And that's one of the challenges that exists. I get so many emails, where do I turn to? We're having legitimate struggles in our family with a family member, and we need some guidance, but where do we go to? And there's not many options. So we have to create a community, and we have to create alternative healing centers, and we have to open up conversations that I think are just more common sense and based on just kind of the roots of what it takes to live well.
Well said. Well, I would say the good news is the current system probably can't continue much longer because it's so self-destructive. Either it will fall or be reformed, one or the other. Tracy, your take, your final thoughts.
To me, it's pretty simple. Remember who you are. Listen to the voice inside you. That is the source of wisdom. That's the source of sovereignty. That's where God reaches you. There is no authority in your life above God. There is no authority in your life above yourself and God. And I hope that I'm an inspiration to someone who's out there right now, who's on these drugs, or has a family member who's on these drugs, or has suffered a vaccine injury, or is otherwise chronically ill, who's seeing right now that there is a possibility, there is hope. This isn't a death sentence. This isn't the reality you have to accept for the rest of your life. Because I think it was Henry Ford that said, if you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right. Mm-hmm. And step one is knowing it's possible. And for me, that was step one. You know me, Mike, like I'm here today, I'm like a picture of health. And I used to be completely disabled. And so I hope there are other people out there today that hear this, that receive a spark of hope, and it's the beginning of their healing journey.
How can people follow your work? I mean, you don't really publish on the website, do you?
I've been pretty private. I'll be coming out a little more over the next year or so.
Okay.
But I'm on X at Tracy A. Thurman. I don't post often right now. I've been writing at the Brownstone Institute, but I haven't written there that much recently. But you will see more from me in the next year or so.
Okay, we welcome that. Thank you both. Todd, let me ask for your final thoughts here before we go to the after party.
My final thought is I don't want to take any spin off of the message Tracy just gave. I'm good.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, fantastic. Well, we're really humbled to have you both here to share this, I think, really critical message. Thank you for taking the time to travel here, to be here, to share, in many cases, very intimate experiences that you've been through, struggles and so on, because they're common. I mean, many people can benefit from what you've just offered. We appreciate you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank
All
you,
right.
Todd.
Yeah.
Cheers.
All right. So, folks, with that, we're going to take a break and then we'll be back with the after party. And I have no idea how that's going to go today, but I think it will start with voices in our heads. What do you think, Todd?
I know how it's going to go. Exactly.
You do know
how
how
it's going to go. It's how they always go, which is just off the rails.
No, wait. Hey, before we go to the after party, I have a quiz for our guests here today.
Okay.
All right. Let me grab this. Hold on.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. This is just a little pop quiz about the nature of our consumer society. So here is a product called Log Cabin Syrup. And I just bought this at retail. This isn't a trick. The large text on the front says, no high fructose corn syrup. Okay? You see it, right? It's right there. No high fructose corn syrup. Can either of you guess what the first and most prominent ingredient is in Log Cabin Syrup?
I'm going to guess another form of corn syrup.
Oh, you nailed it. It's corn syrup.
Oh, jeez.
Tracy nailed it. Todd, we have a winner.
Crazy.
You win a free bottle of Log Cabin no high fructose corn syrup. Yeah, so the number one ingredient is corn syrup. So, I mean, think about this, Roger, the level of deception in society where they can say, well, there's no high fructose corn syrup. It's just corn syrup. It's like, are you kidding me? But isn't this a great model for kind of what we're told by the medical industry,
Right.
the psychiatric industry?
Well, I'm sure they feed that at school lunches.
Yeah,
and
probably.
then kids go back to school and they fall asleep or they can't focus, and we'll give them another label.
Yeah.
Oh, very
Right.
good.
Right. But it's incredible. And yet the FDA will harass makers of herbs or homeopathy or nutritional supplements or raw milk.
Yeah.
But not these companies
No.
that are deceiving, in my view, deceiving their customers with this kind of misleading labeling.
Exactly.
It's criminal.
It's the FDA. It's the government. Of course it's criminal. Okay. Anyway, you passed the quiz with flying colors. So good job.
Good job.
All right. And by the way, I have our store products over here with actually no corn syrup at all. And you are welcome. Both of you are welcome to our freeze-dried fruit selection.
Oh, I can't wait.
Everything that we have. Yeah, we'll do that. All right. So thank you again for joining us and having fun with us with this format. All right. So to our viewers, we're going to take a break, and Todd and I will be back with an unpredictable after party. So stay tuned.